Your wedding is cancelled." The florist said it like she was confirming the weather. For a second, I thought she had the wrong number. Then she added, "Your mother called. She said it's off." The room didn't spin. I didn't cry. I didn't even speak. I just sat there, holding my phone, while everything I had spent 3 years building disappeared in less than 10 seconds. $18, gone. 200 guests, still coming. And the one person who was supposed to stand beside me had already decided I didn't deserve any of it. But that moment didn't come out of nowhere. Because the truth is, my wedding wasn't the first thing my mother tried to take from me. 7 days before my wedding, my life unraveled in a way I never saw coming. I was 28, standing on what should have been the happiest week of my life, when I discovered that my own mother had quietly cancelled everything: the venue, the caterer, the flowers, every last detail Daniel and I had spent 3 years saving for. Nearly $18,000, gone with a few phone calls. She even told my fiancé I was damaged goods, that loving me would be the biggest mistake he'd ever make. And on the morning of my wedding, 200 guests showed up dressed for a celebration, only to find an empty lot. No chairs, no music, no bride, just silence and confusion. I stood there realizing something I'd avoided my entire life. This wasn't just about a wedding. My mother wasn't protecting me. She was trying to erase me. And for the first time, I had to decide, was I finally going to let her? That question didn't come out of nowhere. If I'm honest, I should have seen it the night Daniel proposed, the moment everything began to shift, even if I didn't have the courage to name it yet. It was a Tuesday evening, nothing fancy, just the two of us in our small kitchen in Pine Hollow, Georgia. The kind of kitchen where the cabinets creak a little when you open them, and the overhead light flickers if you flip the switch too fast. Daniel had just come in from the workshop, sawdust still on his jeans, and I was standing at the counter rinsing out a coffee mug. There was no grand setup, no candles, no violin music playing in the background. He just stood there, a little nervous, holding a ring he'd spent 7 months saving for, and said, "I don't have a speech. I just know I want every morning to start with you." I didn't even let him finish. I said yes before he could get another word out. We ended up sitting on the kitchen floor afterward, my back against the cabinets, his arm around my shoulders. I kept turning my hand under the light, watching that small diamond catch every flicker like it was trying to convince me this was real. For 11 minutes, everything felt right. Simple, certain, ours. Then my phone rang. "Mom." I answered, without thinking, still smiling. "Hey, where are you having it?" No congratulations. No pause. "No, I'm happy for you. Just logistics. Urgency. Control." I glanced at Daniel. He tilted his head slightly, listening without meaning to. "We haven't decided yet," I said. He literally just, "Well, you need to start deciding. Venues book out a year in advance. I'll make some calls." That was how it started. I should explain something. My whole life, every major decision I've ever made has gone through my mother first. College, major, apartment, even what car I bought after my old one finally died at 142,000 miles. After my dad passed when I was 19, she pulled me close at the funeral and whispered, "It's just us now. You're all I have." And from that moment on, saying no to her didn't feel like independence. It felt like betrayal. So when I tried to push back that night, tried to say Daniel and I wanted to plan the wedding ourselves, she went quiet. 4 seconds. I counted them. "Fine," she said softly. "I understand. You don't need me anymore." And just like that, the guilt came rushing in, familiar, immediate, automatic. Like a program running in the background I didn't know how to shut off. "No, Mom," I said quickly. "Of course I need you. I want you involved." I could hear the shift in her breathing. The relief. The satisfaction. "Good," she said, "because I just want to make this beautiful for you." When I hung up, Daniel was still watching me from across the kitchen. He didn't say anything right away, but I saw it, the slight tightening in his jaw, the question he wasn't sure he had the right to ask yet. Back then, I told myself it was nothing. Just a mother wanting to help her daughter. Just excitement, maybe a little overbearing, but harmless. I didn't realize that phone call wasn't about planning a wedding. It was the first move in a game my mother had been waiting years to play. And the truth is, it didn't start with that phone call, it started years earlier, in ways I didn't recognize until much later. After my dad died, everything between my mother and me changed, but not in a way anyone on the outside would have questioned. People brought casseroles, hugged her a little longer than usual, and told me, "Take care of your mama now." I was 19, halfway through my sophomore year, still figuring out who I was supposed to be. Overnight, I became her emotional anchor. At the funeral, she held on to me so tightly I could feel her shaking. Then she leaned in and whispered, "It's just us now. You're all I have." It sounded like love. It sounded like closeness. What I didn't understand then was how heavy those words would become. From that point on, every decision I made somehow circled back to her. When I talked about switching my major from business to education, she said, "Your father would have wanted something more stable." When I mentioned moving into an apartment closer to campus, she asked, "Why would you want to be farther away from me?" When I started dating someone, she always found a reason he wasn't right: too immature, too quiet, not ambitious enough. And each time, I adjusted. I compromised. I told myself she knew better. It wasn't loud control. It was quiet, persistent, wrapped in concern. If I hesitated, she'd sigh and say things like, "I just worry about you," or, "I've sacrificed so much, I only want what's best." And somehow, I always ended up doing what she wanted, because the alternative felt like I was abandoning her all over again. There was a period in college my sophomore year when I did struggle. Grief hit me harder than I expected. I had weeks where getting out of bed felt like lifting 100 pounds, where the world moved forward and I just didn't. I saw a counselor. I worked through it. Slowly, I found my footing again. But to my mother, that chapter never closed. She kept it tucked away like a file she could pull out whenever she needed leverage, not to help me but to remind me that I was fragile, that I needed her. Looking back, I can see how carefully she built that narrative. Every time I made progress, she'd gently question it. Every time I felt independent, she'd remind me of a moment when I wasn't. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't something you could point to and say, "That's wrong." It was a slow shaping of reality, where I began to doubt my own strength and trust hers instead. By the time Daniel came into my life, I was used to filtering everything through her, even my happiness. So when she stepped into the wedding planning, it didn't feel like intrusion at first. It felt familiar, safe, even, like handing over something heavy to someone who had always insisted she was the only one strong enough to carry it. I didn't see it as control. I saw it as love, and that's what made it so dangerous. And that's exactly how she got in quietly, naturally, in a way that felt almost like relief. At first, it was small things, harmless, even. I was teaching third grade full-time, juggling lesson plans, grading papers, trying to hold on to the excitement of being newly engaged while still showing up for a classroom full of 8-year-olds who needed structure more than I needed sleep. So when my mom said, "Why don't I make a few calls for you, just to get quotes?" I said yes without thinking. It felt like help. She started with the florist, then the caterer, then the venue. Each time, she'd come back with updates, numbers, options, opinions already formed. I found a place that's much more appropriate. This caterer knows what they're doing. Trust me, honey, you don't want to deal with this yourself. And slowly, without ever announcing it, she became the point of contact for everything. I didn't notice the shift right away. It happened the way water rises in a basement, quiet, gradual, until suddenly it's at your ankles and you can't remember when it started. One afternoon, I called the florist to ask about wildflowers, sunflowers, lavender, baby's breath. I'd always imagined something loose and alive, something that felt like a summer field instead of a staged display. The woman on the phone hesitated. "Oh," she said, "your mother already finalized the order. White roses and hydrangeas. Very elegant." I stood there in the school hallway, phone pressed to my ear, children's voices echoing in the background. "No, that's not what I chose." "Well," she said gently. She seemed very sure. That became a pattern. I wanted a relaxed reception, pulled pork, cornbread, sweet tea in mason jars. Something that felt like home, like the backyard cookouts my dad used to host every 4th of July. My mom wrinkled her nose the second I mentioned it. "You can't serve barbecue at a wedding, Lauren. People will talk." "Who?" I asked. She didn't answer directly. She never did. "It just needs to be nicer than that." The seating chart was next. I had carefully placed Daniel's parents in the front row, wanting to honor them, to show that this wasn't just my family's day, it was his, too. When I looked at the updated version, my mom emailed out, her friends filled the first 4 rows. Daniel's family had been pushed back, scattered like an afterthought. I brought it up that night, gently, the way I always did. "Hey, Mom, I think there might have been a mix-up with the seating." Her face changed instantly. Her eyes filled with tears so quickly it was almost practiced. "I'm just trying to make this beautiful for you," she said, her voice trembling. "Your father would have wanted it this way." And just like that, the conversation was over. Because how do you argue with that? How do you push back without feeling like you're disrespecting a man who isn't there to speak for himself? So, I backed down. Every time, Daniel noticed before I was ready to admit it. He never confronted her directly, never raised his voice or made a scene. But I started to see it in the quiet moments. The way he'd pause when my mom spoke over me. The way his shoulders would tighten when she dismissed one of my ideas like it was something childish I'd outgrow. Sometimes I'd find him in his workshop late at night, not building anything, just standing there, staring at a piece of wood like he was trying to figure out how to shape something that refused to cooperate. "You okay?" I asked once, leaning against the doorway. He nodded, but it was the kind of nod that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, just thinking." I didn't ask what about. Part of me already knew. About 3 months into the engagement, Megan came over for what was supposed to be a planning night. My mom had laid out centerpiece samples across the dining table, white roses, crystal vases, everything polished and controlled. Megan stood there quietly, taking it all in as my mom rearranged the pieces I'd chosen, swapping them out one by one like she was correcting mistakes. Megan didn't say anything to her. Not then. But when she walked me to the door later, she grabbed my arm, her grip firmer than usual. "I need you to trust me on something," she said. I laughed, a little uneasy. "Okay, what does that mean?" "Just don't question it yet," she replied, "and don't ignore what's happening." I remember brushing it off, telling myself she was overreacting, that this was just what moms did. That wedding stress made everything feel bigger than it really was. But deep down, there was a part of me that felt it too, the shift, the pressure, the quiet way my voice was disappearing from something that was supposed to be mine. I just didn't know how to stop it, because every time I tried, my mother didn't argue. She didn't need to. She just reminded me, in 100 subtle ways, that without her, everything might fall apart. And eventually, that quiet pressure stopped being about the wedding. It shifted subtly at first toward Daniel. About 2 months before the wedding, my mom asked him to lunch. Just the 2 of them. She framed it like a peace offering, said she wanted to get to know him better, talk about family, expectations, the future. I remember thinking it was a good sign. Maybe things were settling. Maybe she was finally accepting him. Daniel didn't say much before he left, just kissed me on the forehead and said he'd be back in a couple of hours. When he came home, something felt different. He didn't storm in. He didn't look angry. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, he walked into the kitchen, pulled out a chair, and sat across from me like he needed to choose his words carefully before he spoke them. "What happened?" I asked. He folded his hands on the table, eyes steady but heavier than usual. "Your mom told me you had a breakdown in college." My stomach dropped. She said. He paused, like he didn't want to repeat it, but knew I needed to hear it. "She said you were damaged goods." The words didn't just land, they cut. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it tilted slightly, like something inside me had shifted out of place. Because it wasn't a lie, not entirely. I had struggled after my dad died. I had needed help. But that part of my life had never been a weapon. It was something I'd worked through, something I had healed from, something I trusted the people I loved to understand, not use against me. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't look away. "I told her I don't see damage," he said. "I see someone who survived something hard. Something in my chest cracked open then, but not in pain. In relief." He continued, calmer now, but there was a firmness in his voice I hadn't heard before. "She also said you'd fall apart under pressure, that I'd be the one picking up the pieces, that I should walk away before it's too late." I shook my head slowly, trying to process it. She said that to you?" He nodded. There was a silence between us that felt heavier than anything she'd said. Because this wasn't about flowers or seating charts anymore. This was personal. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Mom," I answered, already knowing this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. "Daniel disrespected me at lunch," she said immediately, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "How?" I asked. "He questioned me. He challenged me about things that are none of his business. Lauren, I'm trying to protect you. Men like him blue collar. No real ambition, they isolate women. That's how it starts." I closed my eyes. "He builds furniture," she continued. Like that alone was evidence of something lacking. "That's not a future. Your father was an accountant. He provided stability. Dad is gone," I said quietly. The line went silent for half a second, just enough for me to realize I'd crossed a line she didn't want crossed. "Don't you dare throw that at me," she snapped, and hung up. I stood there in the kitchen, phone still in my hand, caught between two versions of reality. The one she had been feeding me for years, where she was the protector, the only one who truly understood what I needed. And the one sitting right in front of me where she was actively trying to dismantle the one relationship that made me feel safe, steady, and seen. Daniel didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't push. He just watched me, giving me space to come to it on my own. And that's when I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit before. My mother wasn't just trying to control my wedding. She was trying to make sure I never had a life that didn't revolve around her. And once I saw that truth, I couldn't unsee it. But I still underestimated how far she was willing to go. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started small, subtle shifts in the way people looked at me, like something had changed, and I was the only one who didn't get the memo. A few weeks later, I walked into Linda's hair salon on Main Street, the same place I'd been going since I was 14. Linda had known me through every bad haircut, every school dance, every phase of growing up. She greeted me the same way she always did, warm and familiar, but as soon as I sat down in her chair, something in her expression softened in a way that felt off. "Honey," she said, lowering her voice as she draped the cape over me. "Are you okay?" I smiled automatically. "Of course. Why?" She hesitated, glancing at my reflection like she was trying to decide how much to say. "Your mama stopped by yesterday. Said things haven't been going well. That maybe this wedding isn't what you need right now." My stomach tightened. "What exactly did she say?" I asked, keeping my tone light even though my chest felt like it was closing in. "Oh, nothing specific," Linda said quickly. "Just that you've been under a lot of stress, that Daniel might not be the right fit." I nodded, forcing a small laugh. "Everything's fine, Linda. Really." But it wasn't. Because the next day, I went to Dale's Market to pick up groceries, and Mrs. Carroll, who had rung up my family's purchases since I was a kid, looked at me in a way she never had before. Not judgment. Not curiosity. Pity. "Lauren," she said gently as she handed me my receipt. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here." I didn't ask her what she'd heard. I already knew. Pine Hollow has a population of just over 4,000 people. In a town that size, news doesn't travel, it spreads. Quietly, quickly, like something alive. Within 48 hours, my mother had planted the same story everywhere it mattered. At the salon, at the grocery store, at church parking lots, at school pickup lines. Lauren is fragile. Lauren isn't stable. Daniel is a mistake. This wedding shouldn't happen. And suddenly, I felt it everywhere. The way conversations softened when I walked into a room. The way people tilted their heads when they spoke to me, like they were handling something delicate that might break if they weren't careful. Parents at school started speaking to me in that overly gentle tone like I wasn't their child's teacher anymore, but someone they needed to tiptoe around. I caught two women whispering near the mailboxes one afternoon, their voices dropping just enough when I stepped outside. At church that Sunday, a woman I barely knew squeezed my hand a little too tightly and said, "We're praying for you." Praying for what? For me to come to my senses? For me to fall apart? It was like watching my own identity get rewritten in real time and having no control over the narrative. That Thursday evening, as I was sitting at the kitchen table staring at a stack of ungraded papers, my phone buzzed. A text from Megan. "Don't react to anything your mom does this week. I mean it. Trust me." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. "What do you mean?" I typed back. "You're scaring me." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. "Good," she replied. "Scared means you're paying attention." That was it. No explanation. No details. Just a warning that something bigger was happening beneath the surface. And for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I listened. I didn't confront my mother. I didn't try to correct the rumors. I didn't defend myself in conversations where I knew people were silently judging me. I just watched. And the more I paid attention, the clearer it became. This wasn't random. It wasn't emotional. It was deliberate. She was isolating me, one conversation at a time, one rumor at a time, one carefully placed doubt after another. She was turning the town I grew up in, the people who had watched me become who I am, into a quiet audience that saw me as unstable, unreliable, someone who needed to be saved from her own decisions. And the worst part? A small, familiar voice inside me still whispered, "What if she's right?" That was the damage she had done over the years, not just controlling my choices, but shaping the way I saw myself when everything around me started to collapse. But this time, something was different. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was waiting, and I didn't yet know why that mattered, but Megan did. And waiting would have been easier, if there hadn't been so much on the line. Because behind all the rumors, behind the tension, behind the quiet unraveling of my life in that town, there was something else sitting there, something heavy, real, and impossible to ignore. Money, not just any money. Our money. Daniel and I had spent 3 years building it, one small decision at a time. Packing lunches instead of eating out, skipping vacations, driving my old Honda until it hit 160,000 miles and started making that rattling noise we both pretended wasn't a problem yet. He picked up extra carpentry jobs on weekends, sanding, staining, delivering custom pieces late into the night. I stayed after school, grading papers, tutoring when I could, saving every spare dollar like it actually meant something because it did. $18,000. That number wasn't just a budget. It was a timeline. 3 years of saying not now, so we could have something later. It was supposed to be our start, maybe a down payment on a small house one day, something with a yard and a front porch. Somewhere we could build a life that felt like ours. Instead, it was tied up in contracts. I sat at the kitchen table one evening, my laptop open in front of me, staring at a spreadsheet that suddenly felt more like a countdown than a plan. Every line item had a number next to it. Florist, $2,000 and $20,000. Caterers, $4,800. Venue deposit, $3,500. DJ, photographer, rentals. It added up faster than I wanted to admit. Most of those contracts had a 30-day cancellation policy. We were already inside that window. If we walked away right now, I said, not looking up from the screen, how much would we lose? Daniel was sitting across from me, sanding down the leg of a chair by hand. He didn't even pause. Most of it. The word settled into the room like something solid. Most. Not half. Not a manageable amount. Most. I closed my laptop slowly, pressing my palms against the surface like I could somehow hold everything in place if I didn't move too fast. "We can't afford to lose that," I said. "I know," he replied quietly. And the truth was, it wasn't just about the number. It was about what that number represented. 3 years of effort. 3 years of discipline. 3 years of believing we were building something steady and real. And now, all of it was sitting in agreements controlled directly or indirectly by a woman who didn't want this wedding to happen in the first place. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to think clearly and failing. "If I don't do something," I said slowly, more to myself than to him, "we lose the money. We lose face in front of 200 people. I lose your mom's trust." I paused, the weight of the next words pressing harder than anything else. "And I lose myself." That last part hung there, because that was the piece I couldn't put into a spreadsheet. Daniel set the chair leg down and looked at me. Really looked at me, the way he always did when things mattered. "You won't lose me," he said. I nodded, because I believed him. That was never the question. But everything else? That still felt like it was slipping. And the worst part was, I could feel the pressure building from every direction. The town whispering. My mother pulling strings I couldn't even see yet. The clock ticking down, 1 day at a time. 7 days until the wedding. 7 days to figure out how to hold on to something that was already being taken apart piece by piece. I remember sitting there in that quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, thinking this had to be the bottom. that this was as bad as it could get. I was wrong. The bottom didn't come slowly. It didn't give me time to brace for it or ease into the impact. It hit all at once on a Monday, 7 days before my wedding, in the middle of a normal workday that had no business turning into the worst day of my life. I was sitting at my desk during lunch, grading spelling tests, red pen in hand, when I decided almost casually to call the florist. Just a quick check-in. Confirm the delivery time. Make sure everything was on track. Routine. That's what I thought it was. The phone rang twice. Willow Creek Florist, this is Debbie. Hi, Debbie. This is Lauren Mitchell, I said, glancing at the clock on the wall. I just wanted to confirm our order for Saturday. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. I'm sorry, ma'am, she said carefully. That order was canceled 3 days ago. The pen slipped from my fingers and rolled across the desk. I'm sorry, what? Your mother called, she continued, her tone professional but hesitant. She said the wedding was off. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind didn't reject what she said, it just stalled. Like it didn't know how to process the information fast enough to feel anything about it yet. Ma'am? She asked gently. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I didn't give myself time to think. I dialed the caterer. Mitchell wedding? The man on the other end said. Yes, we received the cancellation last Thursday. Your mother informed us the event would not be taking place. I hung up again. Next, the venue. Miss Mitchell, I'm so sorry, the coordinator said, her voice already softened, already sympathetic. Your mother contacted us and canceled the reservation. She said the family had decided. I didn't let her finish. I ended the call and just sat there, staring at my phone like it might explain itself if I looked at it long enough. The classroom was empty. 22 third graders were out at recess, laughing somewhere beyond the walls, their voices faint and distant. Life going on like nothing had changed, but everything had. I don't remember leaving the school. I don't remember the drive home. What I remember is the kitchen floor, the cold tile pressing through my dress, the way the afternoon light stretched across the wall in a slow, steady line, like time itself had thickened. My bag was still on my shoulder. My keys were still in my hand. I wasn't crying. That's what stayed with me. I wasn't crying. I was just sitting there, like my body had shut down everything unnecessary just to hold itself together. The front door opened sometime later. I didn't hear it at first. Daniel stepped inside, the faint smell of sawdust following him in from the workshop. He saw me immediately. He didn't ask questions. He didn't rush over. He just walked in, set his keys down, and sat beside me on the floor, close enough that our shoulders touched. We stayed like that for a while. 10 minutes, maybe 15. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. The world kept moving. She canceled everything, I said finally, my voice flat, like it didn't belong to me. Daniel didn't flinch. When? 3 days ago, behind my back. His hand found mine. Warm, steady. She told me this morning it was hers to give or take, I added. The wedding. Our wedding. He was quiet for a moment. Then simply, then we figure it out. I let out a hollow laugh that didn't sound like me at all. 7 days, Daniel. No venue, no caterer, no flowers, and no money to replace any of it. I know. My mother wants me to fail, I said. The words settled into the room like something alive. It was the first time I had ever said that out loud. Not she's difficult. Not she means well. Not she's just protective. No, she wants me to fail. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't try to soften it or reframe it into something easier to accept. He just nodded. Then he reached for his phone. I'm calling Megan. He put it on speaker. Explained everything in short, controlled sentences. Vendors canceled. Patricia responsible. 7 days. There was silence on the other end. Not shocked silence. Focused silence. Don't call any vendors, Megan said finally. Don't call your mother. I need 48 hours. Daniel and I looked at each other. 48 hours? I repeated, my voice barely steady. Trust me, she said. Just trust me. The line went dead. I didn't know what she meant. I didn't know what she could possibly do in 48 hours that would fix something this big. But for some reason, I didn't question it. That night, I drifted in and out of something that wasn't quite sleep, curled up on the couch with a blanket I didn't remember grabbing. At some point, Daniel went into the kitchen. I heard his phone ring. I didn't move. I heard his voice drop lower, quieter. Not tense, not angry, controlled. I didn't catch every word, but I caught enough. She had a breakdown in college. She'll fall apart. Walk away now. My mother's voice. Even without hearing her directly, I knew exactly how she sounded. Calm, certain, convincing. Daniel didn't interrupt her. He let her talk. And then, after a moment, I heard him say something I didn't understand at the time. "Is that everything, Patricia?" A pause. Then, quieter. Noted. The call ended. I didn't ask him about it that night. I didn't have the strength for another blow. The next morning, he told me, she had called him at 10:47 p.m., tried one last time to tear me down, told him I couldn't handle stress, that I would ruin his life, that leaving me now would save him years of regret. And while she spoke, he recorded everything. Georgia is a one-party consent state. He knew that. Some contractor had mentioned it to him once after a bad job dispute. So he let her talk. He let her say every word she thought she could hide behind concern. And then he saved it. When he finished telling me, I didn't feel shocked. I felt something else, something quieter, clearer, because for the first time, I realized this wasn't just emotional manipulation. This was strategy. Calculated, intentional, repeated, and whatever came next. I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let her win. And that was the moment something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. There was no yelling, no breaking point that anyone else could point to and say, that's when it happened. It was quieter than that. Colder, like a door closing somewhere deep inside me. For 28 years, every instinct I had when it came to my mother had been the same: explain, soften, fix, apologize. If she pushed, I bent. If she cried, I folded. If she crossed a line, I erased it for her and told myself it wasn't really there. But sitting there, hearing what she had done, what she was still doing, I realized something I couldn't ignore anymore. She wasn't confused. She wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't trying her best. She was choosing this, choosing to humiliate me, choosing to isolate me, choosing to dismantle the one thing in my life that didn't revolve around her. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fix it. I didn't reach for my phone to call her. I didn't rehearse explanations in my head or try to find the right words that might finally make her understand. Because there were no right words. There never had been. I sat at the kitchen table that night long after Daniel had gone to bed, the house quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floor settling. My phone was right there in front of me. I could have called her. I could have asked why. But I already knew the answer. Because control mattered more to her than my happiness ever did. That truth didn't break me. It steadied me. For the first time in my life, I stopped seeing her as someone I needed to manage and started seeing her as someone I needed to set boundaries with. Real ones. The kind that don't come with explanations or negotiations. Just decisions. Megan had told me to wait 48 hours. Before, that would have driven me crazy. The not knowing, the lack of control, the silence. But now it felt different. Now it felt like space. Like breathing room I'd never given myself before. So I made a choice. I didn't call my mother. I didn't defend myself to the town. I didn't try to repair something she had deliberately broken. I stayed quiet. Not the quiet of fear. The quiet of someone who had finally stopped asking for permission. And in that silence, something unfamiliar settled in. Not peace. Not yet. But something close. Clarity. And for the first time, I wasn't reacting to her anymore. I was waiting. And whatever came next, I was going to face it on my terms. And for once in my life, waiting didn't feel like weakness. It felt like control. The next 48 hours stretched longer than any 2 days I can remember. Not because nothing was happening, but because everything was happening just out of sight. Megan didn't check in constantly. She didn't send updates or reassure me every few hours. That wasn't her style. When she said, "Trust me," she meant it in a way that didn't leave room for hovering or second-guessing. The first morning, I woke up expecting panic to hit me the second my eyes opened. It didn't. That surprised me more than anything. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, watched the sunlight come through the window in that same slow, steady way it always had. For the first time in days, I wasn't replaying every conversation, every rumor, every possible outcome. I was just still. Daniel moved around quietly, giving me space without making it obvious. That was something I'd come to rely on, his ability to be present without pushing. He didn't ask, "What's Megan doing?" or, "Do you think this is going to work?" He trusted her, and somehow, that made it easier for me to do the same. By the second day, though, the questions started creeping back in. What could she possibly fix in 48 hours? We didn't have a venue. We didn't have vendors. We didn't have money to start over. And the town already believed whatever version of me my mother had decided to hand them. I picked up my phone more times than I want to admit, started to dial Megan, then stopped, opened my mother's contact, closed it again. Each time, I reminded myself, this is different now. I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. Late that afternoon, Daniel left for a couple of hours, said he needed to run an errand, but didn't give details. I didn't ask. There was a quiet understanding between us. Now some things were moving behind the scenes, and not all of them needed to be explained in the moment. When he came back, there was a shift in him. Not dramatic, but noticeable. The kind of shift you feel before you fully understand it. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded. Yeah. There was something else in his eyes, though. Something steadier, more certain. I didn't press. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing beside me. My mind drifted back over everything that had happened, the cancellations, the rumors, the phone calls, the way my entire life had seemed to tilt in a matter of days. And then, quietly, it landed on something else. Megan. The way she hadn't panicked. The way she'd said 48 hours like she already knew exactly what she was doing. The way she'd looked at me weeks ago and said, "Don't ignore what's happening." She had seen this coming. Before I did. That realization settled into me slowly, like a piece of a puzzle finally clicking into place. Whatever she was doing now, it hadn't started 2 days ago. It had started much earlier. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel yet. Not hope, not fully, but something close enough to keep me steady. By the time the second night ended, I wasn't wondering if something was going to happen anymore. I was waiting to find out what. And for the first time in this entire situation, I wasn't afraid of the answer. And then I found out what she had been doing. 5 days before the wedding, Megan showed up at our front door just after 9 a.m., carrying a thick manila folder tucked under her arm. Not a purse, not a casual drop-in, a folder the kind people carry when they're about to lay out something serious, something planned. Daniel opened the door, and the second he saw her, he stepped aside without a word. I was at the kitchen table, the same place where everything had unraveled days earlier, and when she walked in, she didn't sit right away. She set the folder down first, carefully, like it mattered. "I need you to let me finish before you react," she said. There was something in her voice that made me sit up straighter. I nodded. She took a breath, then opened the folder. "The day your mom volunteered to handle the wedding," she said, "I started making backup plans." I blinked. What? 6 months ago. For a second, I just stared at her, trying to connect what she was saying with what I thought I understood about the situation. 6 months? I repeated. She nodded. "Do you remember your college graduation?" I did. Not the ceremony itself, I barely remembered walking across the stage. What I remembered was my mother arriving late, arguing with my roommate's parents in the parking lot, then spending the entire reception telling anyone who would listen that my education degree was a waste, that I should have gone into business, that I was settling. I had cried in the bathroom. Megan had held my hair back while I tried to pull myself together. "I made a promise to myself that day," she said quietly, "that she would never get to ruin another milestone for you." The room went still. She reached into the folder and pulled out a contract, sliding it across the table toward me. "Willow Springs Garden," she said. "Private property, about 12 minutes outside town. Owned by a friend of mine from an event planning job I did a few years ago. I locked it in 6 months ago, paid the deposit myself." I picked up the paper, my hands slower than my thoughts. The date was there. 6 months. Signed in her name. "You paid for this?" I asked, my voice catching somewhere between disbelief and something deeper. "You'd do the same for me," she said simply. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed, staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Megan didn't pause. She flipped to the next page. "Florist Sandy's blooms out of Cartersville. Wildflowers. Sunflowers. Lavender. Baby's breath. She glanced at me. Exactly what you wanted. My hand went to my mouth. Caterer Big Jim's Smokehouse. Pulled pork, brisket, cornbread, sweet tea, all booked as a backup. DJ is Marcus, friend of mine. Photographer is Lena, my coworker. She shoots weddings on the side. Daniel let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, like the tension he'd been carrying for weeks had finally found somewhere to go. Megan kept going. Total backup cost is about $6,500. I've already covered it. You can pay me back whenever you're able. No rush. I shook my head, tears blurring the edges of everything in front of me. Megan? I can't. Yes, you can, she said firmly. And you will. Later. Right now, we focus on the wedding. She pulled out another sheet, this one a printed list. Guest list. I used the original version you sent me when you first got engaged, before your mom took over communication. 200 names, phone numbers, emails, everything. I've built a separate contact database for all of them. I stared at the pages. Color-coded, highlighted, organized down to the smallest detail. The morning of the wedding, she continued, I send out a mass text. Then I personally call the 15 most important people Daniel's family, your Uncle Rob, close friends. The message is simple. Venue has been upgraded. New address. Be there by 3 p.m. We frame it as a surprise. I swallowed hard. And my mother? I asked. Megan met my eyes directly. She gets the original address. Silence. Not heavy. Not tense. Clear. Final. The weight of that decision settled over the room, and for a moment, I didn't know what I felt. Relief? Guilt? Justice? Maybe all of it. She canceled that venue, Megan added calmly. As far as she knows, that's still where the wedding is. That's where she'll go. I looked down at the contract again, at the date, at her name, signed across the bottom. 6 months. She had seen this coming before I ever did, before Daniel did, before anyone. I also reached out to someone else, Megan said, her tone shifting slightly. Maggie Coulter, WRDG-TV, local interest piece, best friend saves wedding. She doesn't know about your mom. Not yet, just that it's a feel-good story. A camera crew. A public moment. A truth that could no longer be rewritten or hidden. I hesitated. Megan watched me carefully. You don't have to decide that part right now. But Lauren, your mom already made this public. She posted about it. She told the whole town her version. I thought about the Facebook post, the whispers, the looks. She made it public first, Megan said softly. This is just the truth catching up. I sat there, surrounded by pages and plans and details that had been quietly built in the background of my life for half a year. All this time, while I was trying to keep the peace, Megan had been preparing for war, not against my mother, for me. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, and for the first time since everything fell apart, I wasn't trying to figure out how to fix it. I was looking at something already fixed, something stronger than what I had before, something that had been built not on control, but on love, and once I really saw it, I realized this wasn't just a backup plan, it was a turning point. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to something my mother had done. I was part of something she couldn't control. Megan closed the folder and looked at me like she already knew what question I was about to ask. So, what do we do now? I said. She didn't hesitate. We follow the plan. There was no drama in her voice. No hesitation. Just certainty. And somehow, that steadiness grounded me more than anything else had in the past week. We spent the next hour going over every detail, step by step, not rushed, not chaotic, but deliberate. Megan had already mapped everything out. All we had to do was step into it. The morning of the wedding, she said, tapping the guest list. I send out a mass text to everyone. Simple, clean, no room for confusion. Then I start calling one by one the people who matter most. Your Uncle Rob, Daniel's parents, a handful of close friends. I make sure they understand the new address and the time. I nodded, following along. And we don't tell anyone why? I asked. No, she said. We frame it as an upgrade, a surprise. People don't question good news. That made sense. In a town like Pine Hollow, people love a good story, but they love a happy story even more. And my mom? I asked again, even though I already knew the answer. Megan held my gaze. She doesn't get the update. It landed differently the second time. Not shocking anymore. Just real. She thinks the wedding is still at the original venue, Megan continued. The one she canceled. That's where she'll go. I looked down at my hands, turning that over in my mind. For years, every instinct in me would have pushed back on that. Would have said it was too harsh, too cruel, too much. But now it felt like the first honest boundary I had ever drawn. She made a decision, Megan added quietly. This is just the consequence of it. Daniel stepped closer, resting a hand lightly against the back of my chair. Not guiding, not pressuring, just there. You okay with that? He asked. I thought about it not as a daughter, not through the lens my mother had shaped for me, but as someone who had finally stepped outside of it. She had canceled my wedding. She had tried to turn an entire town against me. She had called the man I loved and told him to walk away. And even then, she believed she would still be standing at the center of everything. No, I said slowly. She doesn't get to be there. The words felt unfamiliar, but they didn't feel wrong. Megan nodded once, like she'd been waiting for that. Good, she said. Then we move forward. From that moment on, everything shifted into motion. Not chaotic, not rushed, focused. Megan started organizing the communication timeline, who would get texts, who needed calls, what time everything would go out. Daniel began coordinating with the backup vendors, confirming times, deliveries, setup. I sat there at the table for a minute longer, letting it all settle, because for the first time, I wasn't watching something fall apart. I was watching something come together, something intentional, something protected. And maybe the most surprising part of all, I didn't feel guilty, not in the way I would have before. There was no voice in the back of my mind telling me I was being unfair or ungrateful. There was just a quiet certainty. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. This was me finally choosing not to let someone who had spent years taking from me take one more thing. I stood up, smoothing my hands against my jeans, and looked at Megan. Let's do it, I said. And for the first time since everything began, it felt like the story was finally mine again. And when the day finally came, everything we had built in silence began to unfold in the open. I woke up at 6 a.m., in Megan's guest room, to the sound of her already on the phone. Yes, ma'am, venue upgrade. It's a surprise for Lauren and Daniel. The new address is Willow Springs Garden, 412 Whitfield Lane. Please arrive by 3 p.m. And just to be clear, do not go to the original location. Her voice was calm, steady, practiced, like she had done this 100 times before. I sat up slowly, the reality of the day settling into my chest, not heavy this time, but full, focused. Megan stood in the living room in sweatpants, barefoot, headset in place, a printed spreadsheet in her hand. Every name highlighted, every detail tracked. Yellow for texts sent, green for confirmed, red for follow-ups. By 8 a.m., she had already called 15 people. By Jashant Kram a 0 a.m. Nearly everyone had confirmed. 197 out of 200. 3 couldn't make it, 1 had a sick child, 2 were out of town. No one missing because of my mother. No one confused, no one lost. Except one. She never got the call. She never got the message. And for the first time in my life, that wasn't an accident. At noon, I stood in front of the mirror in Megan's bedroom, looking at myself in a dress my mother had called second-hand embarrassment. Ivory, tea-length, lace sleeves. I bought it from a consignment shop in Atlanta for $60, and somehow, it felt more like mine than anything she had ever tried to choose for me. Megan stood behind me, adjusting the fabric at my shoulders. You ready? She asked. I took a breath, meeting my own eyes in the mirror. I've been ready for a long time, I said. At 1:30 p.m., Uncle Rob arrived. He stood in the doorway for a second when he saw me, his eyes softening in a way that made my throat tighten. Lord, Lauren, he said quietly. You look just like your daddy on his wedding day. I smiled, blinking back tears I didn't want to fall, not yet. He stepped forward, offering his arm. You ready to walk? He asked. I nodded. Yeah, I said. I am. Willow Springs Garden sat at the end of a gravel lane lined with tall pecan trees, their branches arching overhead like something out of a memory you didn't realize you were holding on to. A white wooden gate stood open, and beyond it, everything I had imagined. Wildflowers, sunflowers, lavender, baby's breath spilling naturally along the edges of the lawn. Not arranged, Not controlled. Alive. The way I had wanted. Wooden chairs lined a simple aisle, each one hand-built. Daniel's work. Weekends and late nights, I thought he'd spent just keeping busy. He had been building our wedding, piece by piece, without me even knowing. Fairy lights hung between two old oak trees, catching the afternoon sun in a way that made everything feel warmer, softer, real. Guests began arriving around 2:30 p.m., and one by one, they stopped at the gate. Some of them laughed softly in disbelief. Some pressed their hands to their chests. Some just stood there for a moment, taking it in. "This is better than the original," I heard someone whisper. Susan, Daniel's mother, walked straight toward me the second she saw me, wrapping her arms around me so tightly I felt something inside me settle. "This," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "is exactly what it was supposed to be." And for the first time, I believed that. Maggie Coulter from WRDG TV stood quietly off to the side with her cameraman, capturing everything without interrupting it. Just observing, letting the story unfold the way it was meant to. At exactly 3 p.m., the music started. Not a grand entrance, not something rehearsed to perfection. Just a guitar. A simple, finger-picked melody played by one of Megan's friends, sitting on a stool beneath the oak tree. Uncle Rob's arm tightened slightly as we stepped forward together. "Slow steps," he murmured. "Make it count." And I did. Every step down that aisle felt different from anything I had imagined before. Not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. 200 faces turned toward me, some smiling, some already wiping away tears. People who had heard the rumors, people who had been told a version of me that wasn't true, and now they were seeing something else entirely. Truth. Daniel stood at the end of the aisle, his hands clasped, his eyes already red. He didn't try to hide it. He never hid anything from me. When I reached him, Uncle Rob placed my hand in his and gave him a look that didn't need words. "Take care of her," he said. Daniel nodded. "I will." The ceremony itself was simple. No elaborate vows, no long speeches, just promises. Real ones. And as we stood there, surrounded by everything my mother had tried to erase, I realized something that felt bigger than the moment itself. She had taken everything she could. The vendors, the plans, the version of the wedding she didn't approve of. But she couldn't take this. She couldn't take the people who showed up. She couldn't take the life I was choosing. She couldn't take me. When we said "I do," it wasn't just about marriage. It was about something else entirely. Freedom. And as the applause rose around us, as the sunlight filtered through the trees, as Daniel's hand tightened around mine, I didn't think about what had been lost. I thought about what had survived. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. And in that moment, as the applause settled and the music softened into something warm and steady, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. This wasn't just a wedding. It was an ending. And a beginning. For so long, I had measured my life through my mother's voice, what she approved of, what she questioned, what she quietly reshaped until it no longer felt like mine. Even when I thought I was making my own choices, there was always a part of me looking over my shoulder, waiting for her reaction, bracing for her disappointment. But standing there, hand in Daniel's, surrounded by people who had chosen to show up, not out of obligation, not out of pressure, but out of love, I felt something shift for the last time. Not fear, not guilt, not even anger, just distance. A clean, quiet distance between who I had been and who I was becoming. I didn't know where my mother was at that exact moment. I could picture it, of course, the empty lot, the confusion, the realization slowly setting in that things had not gone the way she planned. For years, I would have rushed to fix that, to explain, to soften the edges of her experience so it didn't hurt as much. But I didn't, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I finally understood something simple and undeniable. Her choices were hers, and for the first time in my life, I was allowing mine to be mine, too. The reception unfolded the way the day had naturally, imperfectly, beautifully. Laughter carried across the lawn. Glasses clinked. People told stories I hadn't heard in years. Stories about my dad, about growing up, about moments I had almost forgotten. Daniel's hand never left mine for long, and every time I looked at him, there was that same quiet certainty in his eyes. We had made it, not because everything went right, but because the right things stayed. At one point, Megan found me near the edge of the garden, watching the lights come on as the sun dipped lower. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah," I said, and for once, it wasn't automatic. It was true. She smiled, that same steady, knowing smile she'd had from the beginning. "Told you to trust me." I let out a small laugh. "You did more than that." She shrugged, like it hadn't been anything extraordinary, like she hadn't quietly rebuilt an entire moment of my life from the ground up. But I knew better. And as I stood there, taking it all in, the people, the light, the life I was stepping into, I realized something else. Family isn't just who raises you. It's who stands with you when it matters. Sometimes, those are the same people. Sometimes, they're not. I didn't have all the answers about what would come next with my mother. Maybe there would be a conversation someday. Maybe there wouldn't. Maybe distance would stay. Or maybe it would shift into something new. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that uncertainty. Because my life no longer depended on her approval. It depended on my choices. And as the night settled around us, as the last of the sunlight gave way to the soft glow of string lights overhead, I held on to one simple truth. She tried to take everything from me, but she didn't win. Because I didn't disappear. I chose myself, and this time, I wasn't going back. Sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that love without boundaries can slowly become control. This story reminds us that not all harm comes from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people closest to us, disguised as care. Real strength isn't in keeping the peace at your own expense, but in recognizing when your voice has been silenced and choosing to reclaim it. Life will test you in ways that force a decision. Stay comfortable and unseen, or step forward and risk everything for your own identity. In the end, peace doesn't come from approval. It comes from finally choosing yourself.